Thanks for coming upstairs for our first breakout of the day. Hopefully you've had a good time at the conference so far. I know I'm still thinking about everything that I've learned, and it's been pretty amazing. So now we're going to be talking about getting a seat at the table. I know the more and more I hear from the speakers today and other conferences this year, I'm really thankful that I work for an organization where comms has had a seat at the table from the get-go. And so today's talk will talk about how you can get that within your organization. So here to host and moderate our session, I'd like to welcome our staff-based Chief of Staff, Sarah Castillo. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the upstairs slightly warmer room. We're going to have a pretty casual conversation today, and I'm really happy to bring on stage with me Jack Maddock and Megan Clavel, who are right here. Woo! All right. So I have very impressive bios for these two that I am not going to mess up a single word from. So that is why I have this phone right here with me. Megan, you have been in the communications world for quite some time, about 15 years, with world-leading engineering companies across the world, I think, as well. And have seen things from marketing to corporate communications. You've seen billion-dollar acquisitions, technology implementations. Essentially, this is the brain that we want to pick right now. And right now, you started creating the first regional communications role at a Fortune 500 person company, and you are currently leading corporate communications and brand at Ausenco. So I'm very excited to hear more about all of your experiences.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah. And on my left side here, I have Jack. Jack has joined us all the way from London and is the group head of digital engagement at Sky right now. So many of you have probably heard of Comcast as part of NBC Universal Group. Sky is part of that group as well. I think the leading media communications company in Europe, actually. And within the corporate affairs function, Jack is leading the providing communication teams with digital platforms and technology to engage people at Sky and external companies. So you have a really interesting perspective, I think, of lots of different varieties of technology implementations and communications. So we'll have a good chat today. And since we have a nice intimate group here, I'm going to ask for all of your help to let us get to know our two guests here today. So I would like everybody to shout out a fruit, please. Bear with me. There'll be a point to this. What? Bananas. All right. Mango. Okay. We have a lot of tropical stuff here. So the pressure's on. What would you do with your tropical fruit medley that you now have from the audience? What's your best fruit?
Decide what to do with fruit. Yeah. I heard Jeremy shout out banana. Thanks, banana tag back. Now I wonder why that was top of mind. Juice, I think.
Okay, banana
smoothie.
Juice. All right.
Yeah, my 3-year-old's obsessed with smoothies, so.
Very nice.
That's a good smoothie.
Oh, sorry, I stole your answer.
I don't know.
You guys can get used to that. I steal a lot of Jack's answers.
So smoothie on your side too?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So we have a nice morning smoothie wake up going on right now. I appreciate that. All right, so I have a couple of questions for you two. And the first one, of course, the session is about internal communicators having a seat at the table and what that means. So I would like to ask both of you, how do you make sure you have a seat at the table? How do you make that a permanent part of your function? So Jack, why don't you get us started?
Sure. I think perhaps it's stating the obvious, but I think looking at the business objectives and seeing really how you can align to deliver on those. So we're constantly looking about what the business and various teams are trying to achieve and how we use communications to drive that, whether it's something as big as a new product launch or a new campaign through something smaller around awareness of something. I think kind of showing the value that you can add through a kind of a professional function rather than it being done by kind of perhaps side of desk or kind of as a secondary responsibility. So I think it's really interesting to look at the value that it can provide.
Yeah, I like that, tying it all back to value and impact. Megan, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately about being part of the business and understanding business drivers. So not just being a service, dealing with the outcomes, but talking about how are we going to, as you say, what is the business strategy? What are we trying to achieve and how communications can help you get there? Mm-hmm. And then also tying communication results to business results. And it's really difficult to do that. We have a tendency to track views and clicks and that sort of thing, but how do we go one step further and track, sales conversions or recruitment or that sort of thing based on our campaigns? We really need to be so closely tied to business outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, impact. It all comes back to that impact and showing that. So I think that segues nicely. Like when you're making that impact, how do you show that to the rest of the organization, to the rest of the world? And by doing that, how do you advocate for yourself?
Well, I think
Take it away.
Yeah. So much of it is about data. I mean, we all talk about that, and how are we measuring things and making sure in your plan every tactic is aligned to a measurement, and that you're getting all of that data back and you're packaging it in a way that business people understand. So, we in our company are doing a lot of training with our leaders about what good looks like, and not assuming that they understand our data and metrics as well. So really, it's the same thing that we do all the time. We're understanding our audience, where are they, and making sure that your stakeholders, you're also training them, I think is a big part of that, of proving your value and your worth.
So the power of words that we heard about before, that doesn't just work for communications to other parties, that works for also advocating for yourself, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very nice. How about you, Jack?
I think for me, in the kind of the digital space, it's very much looking at the value that digital provides and then being able to justify investments to have the right tools, the right technologies to do better than you would in other ways. So I think that's been really interesting, and looking at the value and the expectations that people have around the way in which we work and communicate, making sure that we have the right tools that fulfill the needs of employees.
Okay. All right, so we talked a little bit about the tools and the way that you can advocate to the people that need to understand the impact that you have in an organization. And then what about looking at your role as a communicator as well? Like, what are some of the things that have been really powerful to help you as a person, as a communicator, as a specialist in this field, advocate for how you've become where you are in the role?
I think a lot of it has been finding leaders who have an appetite for communications and, supporting them and then showing your outcome. The other thing is having a great network of comms people who are trying things in other companies. So you're always bringing something new to the game and kind of showing that you value your role and you treat your role as a discipline. I found that that's been a big shift, is that it's not something, it really is something that you train in, and it is a true discipline, and it's not something anyone can do. I know anyone who received an email ever in their life thinks they're a comms person, but I think we really do need to treat ourselves as a professional, and make sure that you're going to things like this and you're always updating your skills. Our roles are changing all the time, and we really do need to say this is a real role that requires a lot of skill and training, and we ourselves have to treat it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Specialist for sure. Everybody deserves that title here. Yeah.
I think very similar that I work with communicators. Like, I'm not one myself. I work with them, provide them with the tools and the technology that they need, and I think exactly that. In the same sense, that being able to cut through the complexity that typically comes with technology and understanding kind of digital ways of working, I think that's really key, and being able to kind of make it simple for people, but also simple for employees that are consuming that. And I think, as I said, just showing the value of kind of taking different approaches and looking at data and seeing how you can do things differently and improve and build on that each time.
Mm-hmm. And I think you have a super interesting perspective on this too, especially when we talk about data, just the nature of your role. So tell me about the nature of digital and how that supports that, and why is digital so important in internal communications?
I think it's the expectations that people have now. If we look at people's lives outside of work, how things have evolved at such a pace, and then if you look internally within a company, it's just not kept up typically at that same pace. That you can order a taxi on your phone, you can have food arrive in minutes, but then if you want to, I don't know, file expenses or book time off, it's an hour-long process. So I think looking at how we can shift that and move towards kind of the expectations that people now have when they're interacting with their company digitally. And also looking at how we use that within communication, so looking at new ways of communicating, more targeted, more personalized communication, rather than kind of the one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay. And have you seen any particular trends in the industry, especially as stuff has evolved so much over the past 2 years? Like what's standing out? What's making the difference right now?
I think one thing that we've been looking at is using gamification to really land messages in a more engaging way, especially around topics that are perhaps less interesting. The example that we always use is something like data protection, that obviously is really important, but no one's getting too excited about it if we're completely honest. So how do we use something like gamification to really land the key messages that people need to be aware of? So whether it's taking part in kind of online interactive quizzes or games or prize draws, using those types of approaches rather than it just being, here's an email bulletin that kind of highlights a policy that you need to know about. How do we really incentivize and engage people with that message?
Okay.
People aren't excited about data protection? Shocking.
In what world?
Yeah.
And then, so the current trends are happening right now. What do you see about the future? If you had to predict a trend, what would it be?
I think it's taking the personalization even further and kind of the approach to targeting. And it's one thing that we saw, if we look back kind of before the pandemic, we weren't doing a brilliant job at that. We were kind of targeting people, but in still quite broad audiences that it probably wasn't really personalized. Whereas taking it further, kind of everyone gets the specific messages that they need that are relevant to them, whether somebody's a manager and there's comms relevant to that, or whether someone's part of an employee network and there's information around inclusion, D&I, like we heard this morning. And making it really just relevant for the person, so it's kind of that curated view of what they need to know, rather than here's all of the messages the company might want you to know about.
Okay. And how about you? What's the future?
I think it's an integrated experience for employees, really. I think more and more, well, we're going to have a flexible work arrangement forever. You know, you're going to have people at home, you're going to have people in the field, you're going to have people in an office. And how do you help them connect to a culture? And so they need to walk into their virtual office and have, you know, an experience the same way as when they're walking into a real office, and it's branded and it smells a certain way and you know where the bathrooms are. You know, you need that same thing when you're walking into a virtual office as well. And it needs to all be in the same place, and it needs to all feel like the same company. And I really think that that's the future, and more we're seeing those connections come together digitally. Yeah.
Totally like location agnostic across the board.
Yeah.
Okay. And then some of that has obviously come from the last 2 years, like the world changing so much. So when you think about now and then pre-pandemic, like what are some of the changes that you've seen, well, in the industry, of course, but then also with like the people that you're working with, leaders across the organizations, like what changes have you seen that have been really helpful for this new place that comms is coming to?
We really let employees behind the curtain during the pandemic. They saw a different side of leaders. They saw a different kind of communication because it had to be more immediate. It had to be more personal. It was a little bit, I think, scruffier and of the moment. And employees felt, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, a real connection to leadership that they hadn't had before, and how do we keep that kind of feeling of connection in the long term, feeling like we're all experiencing something together. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a silver lining really of the pandemic, and how do we make sure that employees still see sort of that behind the curtain of their companies? Yeah.
How many of you remember the video? I think it was a newscaster or an interview where the kid runs into the background, and all of a sudden you realize like that's a human right there. I think that is absolutely a silver lining that came out of this. Yeah.
No, completely. I think as well, looking at the pace of change that companies have seen and the way that we've been able to move more quickly than perhaps we would have done. It's interesting, we were, from a communications kind of platform point of view, we were looking at kind of where do communities and conversations sit. So we took the decision to roll out Yammer kind of from Microsoft, and we'd planned, I think, kind of like a 12-month rollout across 50,000 employees. It was the most kind of painstaking, staged rollout. And then come March 2020, we obviously all know what happened, and within a week of being kind of at home within the UK, we rolled it out to that many people in like a week or two. And it was just the commitment and the decision to, we'll just do it and we'll try it and we'll see what happens, rather than perhaps a more slow, kind of drawn out approach before.
Mm-hmm. It's like the importance of sort of your end game. Like you need to have a strategy, absolutely. But I think previously we were overthinking all the small pieces without a strategy. And now really think through where do you want to end up, and then don't overthink the little pieces.
And taking risks and bets within it, that kind of not everything always needs to work out, being able to kind of try something, a proof of concept, and see if it works and take learnings, and if it doesn't, do it differently. If it does work, fantastic.
Yeah. All back to that human element. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, we're going to open it up for audience Q&A in a little bit. I have a couple more questions for these two, but I want you all to start thinking. Well, give them some heavy hitter questions up here.
No more fruit questions.
No more fruit questions. Yes, we all like smoothies, though. That's a good thing. Yeah. So when we talk about the trends of the future, all of these things that are coming up, I think there's a lot of excitement there, but that doesn't always come without challenges. So if you think about the future of internal communications, what are some challenges that you would suggest everybody here is aware of and start thinking about?
For me, it's, as Jack was saying, that people's experience outside of their company needs to be mirrored inside. And what some outside companies have that inside, or we don't have, is data about who people are. Really great, solid, accessible data about what do you do, who do you manage. It's always so surprising that we can't micro-target people within our company. And so what that is going to take is a really close partnership with your IT team and with your HR team to make sure that we can find people and give them the information that they need, because I think everyone's done with global emails. Like, does anyone ever want to get a global email again? We don't want to write them. We don't want to get them. We really want our company to know who we are. And so overall, companies need to get better at knowing who their employees are and what they need. And that's going to take partnership with sort of all of the services.
And those partnerships, do you think that comes naturally as along with this idea of having a seat at the table, or is it something that you need to build on top of that?
I think it takes time to do that. Sometimes we only intersect when they need to get something out, and they have a change or an advisory or an announcement. And I think, there's a lot of work to be done in spending time with those organizations and understanding how they work. And I spend way too much time with IT, I have to say. They're tired of me now. But it is really important that you do the work to build those relationships, because I don't think it is a natural overlap.
Okay, so really focusing on those relationships for the future. Yeah, okay, that partnership makes a lot of sense. And about you, what do you see as challenges in the future?
I think sticking with people and looking at skills and the knowledge and the understanding that people within the business need, especially kind of communications, colleagues, growing skill set around digital and around technology. And it's interesting, if I look at the setup that we have, in the long term, I would see that my team wouldn't really need to exist, because we're basically the interface between the business and technology, and we should be eventually in a place where we've got people on all sides that can communicate effectively, people that have a strong enough understanding of technology and ways of working and how to approach things, whereas at the moment it's very much kind of speaking two very different languages, and you need somebody to kind of cut through that and translate it. And I think that's what will be interesting, where I think in the past a lot of people may have seen that because something's more technical, it's kind of outside of their remit perhaps, where that's just going to shift. We all know that digital is the new normal. I think it's going to be interesting to see how skills and kind of development keep up with that.
Mm-hmm. This idea of speaking the language of other teams, of IT, of technology, I think it's really interesting. And if you've become these strategic partners for companies for pushing out culture and vision and strategy, Do you find yourself speaking a different language with the company as well? Has that changed?
I mean, from a technology standpoint, I mean, I've learned what API means, so that's
Yes,
that was new. Yeah, but I do think, more and more, every service isn't just communications. Needs to make sure they're always evolving, and now a lot of our evolution is around digital and technology. So you need to have a base level knowledge so that you can go out and find what you need to get better. That it's not IT's job to do that for you. It's our job to figure that out, to say, this should be easier, or we should be able to do this, and what would help us make that happen, and then use kind of the other resources in your company to do that. So yes, you have to go out and kind of pursue that knowledge.
Yeah, that goes right back to what you mentioned earlier, like using things like this and connections and networking to just keep building on that knowledge and experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now APIs. I mean, come on, next level.
I know what an API is. It's really important.
Yeah. How about you? Has your language changed?
I think it's, as I said, just trying to bring together different points of view and people with different priorities, but also challenging kind of the status quo and understanding kind of if we can do things differently and better and what we get from that. I think people can be often quite comfortable with the current way of working or the current approach to things, so really kind of conveying why it would be better to do things differently or why we should invest in certain things. It's not always easy when you've got kind of lots of people that are very comfortable with what they have already.
Yeah, and now we're off to change management, and we could spend a couple hours on that right now. Yeah. All right. Okay, so now I have, this is probably better than the fruit question, but we're gonna get a little creative with this one. Imagine that you have, gone and seen the Broadway show Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, and you came back, and all of a sudden you learned magic too. And if you could make an internal communications magic miracle happen overnight, what would it be?
Wouldn't be the first thing I'd do with magic.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Of all the things. So.
Or you could make a smoothie too.
Yeah.
We've got options. So I think ourselves as a business, we've been around for quite a while. So with that, we don't always have the agility that a smaller business with less kind of legacy would have. So I think we do often spend time having to work through some existing things that we've had systems that have been in place for 20 or 30 years. We talked about data and various other things. So I think a lot of that is just stuff that you have to spend time on, which isn't the most exciting, but it sets the foundations to deliver the more exciting stuff on top of. So probably a very boring thing if I was given the power of magic, but yeah.
Well, we can say this doesn't have to be the only thing that you do with magic. It's just one of the very impactful, important things you're doing with it. Yeah. Megan, how about you?
I would say that no one ever came to me again saying, I need a video. And instead, they came to me and said, I have a problem. And then we work together to solve it. And I actually do think that that's happening more and more. Instead of coming to us with solutions, they say, I need to do this, I need this to happen, or I can't make this happen, can you help? And I think that makes my job so much more satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I love that. All right, audience, it's your turn. What questions do you have for Megan, for Jack?
I do.
Be on the mic. With the conversation, a seat at the table, my interaction with communicators, I find that one of their biggest challenges is they may have a seat at the table, but they don't actually have access to the budget or that entire part of the conversation. So how do we, as communicators, get that power or have that conversation with the people that do?
Yeah, that is a really tough one. And it's taken, I think, a long time to recognize that it needs a budget outside of people. So largely, communications budgets are just humans to do work. But I think this is where the importance of data and tying to business outcomes is that when you put together a case for a budget, it actually needs to be tied to something the business is trying to achieve, not just something communications is trying to achieve. So just like any other part of the business, you need to prove that there's an ROI related to what your stakeholders care about. And so, sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of what we're trying to buy now is the ability to present data. So you don't have any data to show them that you can save them money, but I do think you really need to think about what your stakeholder cares about and how the money that you're asking for helps them achieve that.
I have a follow-up for that, actually. What are some of the strategic objectives that you've seen or heard about recently that you can use to tie together to budget?
Well, I think recruiting is a big one, and that is also like an easy link between like the work we do as communicators and directly, how many resumes came in after we did that campaign, and we need a tool like the Hootsuite or something in order to do those campaigns more effectively. Like I think that's, any HR department would say, yeah, let's figure that out. And once you have kind of other stakeholders who do have budget, understanding that they can meet their needs faster and cheaper with the tool, that will help you sell it too.
Okay, yeah. And on the digital side, do you see any really core strategic objectives that are standing out?
I think it's, as we've said, kind of really aligning the various ways of doing things, or looking at how we can do things differently and better, and how that, as we've said, kind of aligns to the objectives of the campaign, or what the individual that perhaps holds the budget, what they're really wanting to achieve, and just how you can align it to their objectives.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now if you need a strategic objective, tie it back to retention or to culture, I imagine, and get that budget. Yeah. More questions? Yeah.
So I'm curious then, with ideas of bringing in Hootsuite for more communications, the business, IT having problems and lots of systems. How do you make yourself part of the solution? Because there are more and more systems. Gartner is calling it yet another thing to check, which is becoming a problem. And if you're adding to Hootsuite more communication strategies when Salesforce is trying to bomb you with messages, and Yammer is trying to bomb you with messages, and Teams is trying to bomb you with messages, and I need to go to all those things to actually do my job, how do you actually partner with them in a way where you're not actually kind of working against them? Because God only knows that they're communicating ineffectively as it is and causing a bit of a swamp. So how do you actually fix it other than a communication strategy? Like, what is the fold together and get rid of some of the problem solution?
Jack, I imagine you hear this often.
Yes, I think that's, everyone faces that. It's kind of that overwhelming amount of communications in all directions. And I think there's a few things, I think from the kind of the outward communication perspective, working out what's the right channels and the right way of doing things and putting the right tools and training in place, but then also for the people receiving the communications, similarly giving them some power around how do they decide where they want to be communicated, or how do they switch things off if it's not right for them, or depending on different types of roles. So I don't think there is a silver bullet for it, but it's definitely around how do you give people the right information to take some control over that, rather than just being kind of overwhelmed, which is very easily done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the importance of not just a communication strategy, but a channel strategy. So what do you communicate where, and being really disciplined about sticking to that? Because a lot of stakeholders will come to you and just say, just do it all.
Put it out.
Yammer, Teams, email, yes. And then you have to pull them back and say, where's your audience? Where do they go for their information? What do they care about? And let's target that. So, and then also you need employees to understand where they go for what. So looking at where are all the places that we touch employees, and making sure that they're effective, that they're doing the things that you think that they're doing. And I think largely we kind of just say, well, we have Yammer, I guess we should use it, but what should we use Yammer for? When should employees go there? And being really disciplined about making sure that that is what you're using your channel for. So it's a really important part of communications is having a really solid channel strategy and having employees understand what your channels do. And I think there's a partnership, again, with IT to make sure that they're doing what you think they're doing.
All right, I saw another hand up. Yeah, please.
Is it on? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. Same kind of linear thinking about partnerships, which there's a big gray area, and I hope to see like lots of nods in this room, between internal comms and HR. And yeah, hear laughter. Sometimes the gray area can be almost slightly competitive. And especially when you're talking about a seat at the table, who's responsible for what? So I wonder if either of you in your experiences have figured out or unlocked the secret of drawing kind of a partnered line in the sand versus something that's treading on someone else's territory.
That's a tricky one because, I mean, I've been in comms or all kinds of comms positions, some within business lines, some within HR, some in an actual dedicated comms department reporting to a chief strategy and communications officer, yay, which is really ideal. But I think like when you end up within an HR department, the thing is that I don't really believe the role changes. So you still have so much work to do outside of HR that I think you kind of end up broadening your network, and HR becomes a stakeholder similar to IT or your leadership team or that sort of thing. So I've found that if you kind of look at it like really doesn't matter where I sit or where I am, I can still serve across the organization. But yeah, organizational dynamics they're tricky to navigate, I would say, for everyone. And I don't know if I have a great answer.
I think taking that one step further, you can look at the tension between kind of centralized communications teams and then localized kind of department, regional teams, and then working kind of the balance between that. And then looking at that from a digital perspective, you can then see the emergence of like shadow IT, where teams are just going off and, we'll just go and get MailChimp or something, and various other kind of tools. And that's where you then need to kind of see how you can align various people across quite different areas or different regions to one central strategy, but also one way of working, one set of tools, and so on. So yeah, again, I don't think there's an easy answer for that one, unfortunately.
I'm hearing consolidation and relationship building as the two themes. And then also it sounds like both of you are hinting at this idea of what you mentioned earlier with channels and targeting and relevance, and then kind of turning that around and saying like what's relevant for each of my particular partnerships or stakeholders, and then hopefully being able to segment somewhat depending on relevancy for HR, relevancy for internal communications, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. More, please. Yes, I think we have mics coming around.
Thank you. So the impact of internal communications externally is huge, right? So now that we finally have a seat at the table, or so they say, how do we take advantage without the cheesy, so-and-so said this, and we have a great culture? How do we authentically communicate outside the culture inside with our tools, and now that we have a seat at the table?
Is this something that you see with the brand portion as well?
Yeah, and something I think I talk about a lot around what is the value of internal communication is that if you have really great internal comms, your employees are your recruiters, your employees are your sales force. They do all of that work for you if you have great internal comms. So I would say the best way to do it is to let your employees do it for you and give them all of the tools and the training and the confidence to go and sell your company outside. Like they are your best possible channel externally, and really arm them to do it.
And extremely authentic, I imagine. Too.
Yeah, I mean they're gonna talk like themselves whether you want them to or not.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
I think exactly that, just letting people authentically talk about it rather than it being kind of a corporate message. And then looking at how we provide the tools to do that. So whether we give kind of social media tools to kind of share messages, or whether whether it's something like friends and family offers and discounts on products and all different things, but allowing kind of people to authentically share that with their own voice rather than kind of trying to control it too much.
Perfect. All right, we have time for one or two more. Yeah, do we have a mic floating around for in the front here? Right here in the front, Gracie.
A lot of corporate comms is really kind of broadcast out. What's your strategy around 360 feedback? How do you engage with the employees and bring them back into the loop?
Yeah, I think a lot of our, I'm distracted by the fact they're now showing us our own photo.
Yeah.
We'll sit up straighter. I've lost my train of thought. That's
360.
360, there we go. So I think that there are a lot of methods to do that, and the hardest part is actually getting the people who don't typically talk, because there are certain employees you'll always get feedback from. They'll find a way to give you feedback, but how do you dig deeper into the people who typically won't? So I think the point would be to use a lot of channels, so surveys, short surveys, adding comments and responses to the bottom of your email, allowing a lot of time and making your town halls about questions and giving a lot of time for that back and forth anonymously and publicly. So thinking about all of the sort of levels to get that feedback back from your employees in ways that work it's just the way we communicate too. Everyone likes their communications in different ways. Everyone likes to give feedback in different ways too. So are you giving a feedback channel for all kinds of employees?
Do you see any particular feedback channels that really stand out when you talk about the digital experience?
I think, as we've said, kind of, it isn't a one-size-fits-all, but I think also being open to receiving the feedback that you might not want to hear. I think it's always easy, isn't it, to try and find something that kind of aligns to, this was fantastic, or wasn't this amazing, but then equally, what's constructive that we can learn from that, or actually didn't this not work as well as we thought it did. But I think in terms of tools, we're often looking at kind of surveys for kind of broadest kind of groups, and obviously focus groups for really getting into the detail of it.
Awesome. All right, folks. We can potentially squeeze in one more. Let me look in the back and see if I'm allowed. So I think we have our last question over here.
I'll keep it brief. Jack, question for you. So globally, how has the Comcast partnership changed your digital strategy as far as the way you look at things a little bit more globally now?
I think if anything, it just gives us a broader perspective that we're part of a much bigger company. So I think it just allows you to share kind of different perspectives and understand how different people do things in different ways. I think, that's been the key benefit, really. Just kind of understanding, and it's almost an extension of this, kind of working with peers, but you have kind of peers closer to home that you can just share and learn from.
All right. Well, thank you so much, audience. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Megan. This has been really lovely sitting up here with you too, and we will bid you adieu.
Thank you.